Good afternoon. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, June the 22nd, 2022. Here, let me adjust this camera a little bit more. There, that's better. So, serve and protect. That is the motto of many police departments. But is it true? Amidst all the uproar about what happened at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, people are asking, quite justifiably, why didn't the police do something? Why did they sit on their hands for so long? Well, as it turns out, confirmed by precedent, legal precedent, again and again, the police have no no obligation to protect people under any circumstances whatsoever. In Canada, a few years ago, there was a case where a group of women in Toronto who had been raped sued the Toronto Police Service, claiming, apparently with some justification, that the police had a very good idea who the rapist was who was terrorizing Toronto, but they did not act. And the court ruled, again, the police have no obligation to protect anyone at any time. That said, this story in Uvalde, Texas, continues to spiral out of control. This is from Libby Emmons at the Post-Millennial. Texas State Police release full timeline and dispatcher call reveals Uvalde School Police Chief Arredondo false statements. If there's kids in there, we need to go in there, the DPS special agent says. Whoever is in charge will determine that, said an Uvalde officer. Texas DPS released new information in the investigation into the police response to the Uvalde school shooting of May 24th, which left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. Texas Department of Public Safety Director Steve McCraw's reference materials were made public Wednesday, showing transcripts of a call made by School Police Chief Pete Arredondo, an updated timeline of events, and maps and photographs of the school. An incident description was made public based on a recording made of the phone call. This call was made at 11:40 a.m., 7 minutes after the shooting suspect entered the school. Arredondo made the call to a dispatcher to request backup. He was inside the school at the time of the call and stated that the shooter had an AR-15 and shot a whole bunch of times. We're inside the building. He's in one room. Arredondo said, I need a lot of firepower, so I need this building surrounded with as many AR-15s as possible. McCraw said Tuesday that the gunman could have been neutralized in 3 minutes. Uvalde hired a law firm to try to keep the records from going public. The mayor backed Arredondo. Arredondo asked the dispatcher for information they had about the location of teachers, asking, is the teacher with him in his classroom? The dispatcher said the teacher was in another room. Okay, Arredondo said, we have him in the room. He's got an AR-15. He's shot a lot. He's in the room. He hasn't come out yet. We're surrounded, but I don't have a radio with me. He said that the shooter was in room 111 or 112 and we're in here. I'm in the hallway, he said, continuing to call for SWAT to come to the rescue. Arredondo was concerned that the lone gunman had an AR-15 and his officers were armed with pistols. He continued to state that he did not have a radio as the dispatcher asked him to stay on the phone. I am, Arredondo said, but I'm going to drop it when he comes out of that door. Arredondo appeared to believe that the gunman was going to emerge from the classroom as opposed to staying inside and continue to massacre the small children he found there. A new timeline from Texas DPS begins at 11:28 a.m. when the suspect crashed his truck into a ditch and follows him as he shot at 2 men near a funeral home that was across from the school, through to when he was shot and killed by police at 12:50 p.m. The timeline of the shooting and the police response were in contention in the days after the shooting, with conflicting accounts of what happened when and how the gunman accessed the school. It was at 11:29 that a teacher called to report there was a man with a gun. The suspect took cover outside between 2 cars as a school police officer drove past, not seeing the gunman there. The suspect entered through the west door, as seen in the materials released by Texas DPS. At 11:33, he began shooting into classrooms 111 and 112 from the hallway. He went into the room, then came out, then went in again. At 11:35, two Uvalde police officers carrying two rifles went through the west door where the suspect had entered. Arredondo went into the building a moment later, along with two other officers, through the south door. Three more officers and a UCISD officer entered the building through the west door. At 11:37, the suspect shot at the officers from the classroom, injuring two of them. An officer stated that the gunman was contained. It was then that Arredondo called the dispatcher and asked for SWAT backup, claiming that his officers did not have rifles. Surveillance footage shows that the officers were armed with rifles. An Uvalde officer at 11:41 stated his belief that the suspect was barricaded in one of the offices, saying that there's still shooting. Dispatch asks if the door is locked, and the officers do not know, but stated they have something to break it. Additional first responders arrived on the scene by 11:41 a.m. By 11:44, an Uvalde officer said, "Have some officers that are available, get everybody back." At 11:48, an officer whose wife had been shot by the gunman entered the west door and told the officers that she says she is shot. Another officer said they need to get out of the hallway. "Chief is in there. Chief is in charge right now. Hold on," another officer said. An officer told a DPS special agent that they needed to establish a perimeter. Ah, yes, secure da perimeter. Another person commented at 11:53 that asks if there were still children inside the classroom, and a DPS special agent responded, "If there is, then they just need to go in." Additional officers began to question if children were still in the classroom. A DPS special agent asks at 11:54, "Are the kids still in there?" The officer responds, "It is unknown at this time." He's in classroom 111 or 112, but Chief is making contact with him. No one has made contact with him, a Uvalde officer said. "Y'all don't know if there's kids in there?" An officer asks at 11:56. "If there's kids in there, we need to go in there," the DPS special agent says. "Whoever is in charge will determine that," said a Uvalde officer. "It sounds like a hostage rescue situation. Sounds like an undercover rescue. They should probably go in," the DPS special agent says. Another officer states that a supervisor needs to approve that, and the DPS special agent says that the two have different supervisors. It was still an hour until officers went into the classroom. Yes, apparently this was police business, and you don't interfere with police business, even if the police can't agree among themselves. This is another story from the Post-Millennial by Roberto Wakewell Cruz. A police officer whose wife, a teacher at the Uvalde school, was murdered during the Robb Elementary School shooting, tried to rush into the building to save her after she called to tell him she'd been shot. The officer was stopped by colleagues from entering, however, who also took away his gun. Eve Morales died from her wounds. The story was told on Tuesday by Texas Department of Public Safety Director Stephen McCraw, who said that Ruben Ruiz, who worked as an Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District officer, wanted to rush into his wife's aid before being detained in a hallway by other officers, according to local news. McCraw said, "We got an officer whose wife called him and said she'd been shot and she's dying. He tried to move forward in the hallway. He was detained, and they took his gun away from him and escorted him off the scene." Though no specifications were made as to which agency stopped Ruiz from entering. During Tuesday's press conference, McGraw blamed District Police Chief Pete Arredondo for much of the failure that took place in Uvalde, saying that it was Arredondo who told police not to confront gunman Salvador Ramos after the teen barricaded himself in the fourth grade classroom. McCaw called the police shooting's response an abject failure and said that police were on the scene within minutes of the gunman entering the building, but did not act for over an hour. McCraw said 3 minutes after the subject entered the west hallway, there was sufficient number of armed officers wearing body armor to isolate, distract, and neutralize the subject. The one thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children. The officers had weapons, the children had none. The officers had body armor, the children had none. McCraw also said that the classroom door that Ramos had put himself behind had not been locked, a new revelation that contradicts earlier reports from Arredondo's department that the chief had been trying to find the keys for the door for an hour. Officers did not even try to open the door, and McCraw said the doors could not lock from the inside. 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds, McCraw said. That's how long the children waited and the teachers waited to be rescued. While they waited, the on-scene commander waited for radios and rifles, waited for shields, and waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed. So why? Why did this happen? Is it because the police regard, they don't want to get involved in things that are too dangerous? Could that be it? As I noted previously, they have no legal obligation to protect anyone. But what about a sense of embarrassment, a shame? What about conscience? They have guns. Policemen have guns, and they're often quick to use them, but typically not in situations where they might get hurt themselves. We have a very strange story going on in Canada now, following a very strange incident that happened in the province of Nova Scotia in 2020. I'll read from Wikipedia. On April 18th to 19th, 2020, Gabriel Wortman committed multiple shootings and set fires at 16 locations in Nova Scotia, killing 22 people and injuring 3 others before he was shot and killed by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Enfield. For most of the 13-hour crime spree, Wortman was driving a replica police car and may have been wearing parts of a police uniform. On December 4th, 3 people, including Wortman's spouse, were charged with supplying him with ammunition later used in the attacks. Police were criticized for not using Alert Ready to warn the public about the attacks, as well as not responding to reports of Wortman's behavior and previous acts of domestic violence. An investigation into law enforcement's response to the rampage, including the decision not to use Alert Ready, was launched. A public inquiry into the law enforcement response was declared July 28th, following escalating criticism of the investigation's lack of transparency. So this fellow Wortman went on a killing spree, pretty much from one end of the province to the other, from east to west. And what were the police doing? Well, some people are trying to find out, and it's now been confirmed, as everyone knows, that the RCMP is mostly a political institution and not a law enforcement organization. This is from Catherine Tunney at CBC News. Mountie, who wrote that RCMP had interfered in Nova Scotia investigation, came to his own conclusions, says Blair. Emergency preparedness minister. Yes, Canada actually has a ministry of emergency preparedness. Bill Blair I should mention that Bill Blair is responsible for the utter fiasco at the G7 conference in Toronto in 2010, where pretty much the entire city was put under martial law because of some protesters, which of course in these situations, the police simply let them run riot. We've seen it. We saw it at the World Trade Center protests. The WTF protests in Seattle. Was that in 1997? Anarchists were just running around downtown, smashing the city up. The police sat on their hands. And then at 5 o'clock, when the office workers went home, suddenly the police were very aggressive. Who are you? Where are you going? Why? I'm going home. Is that illegal? So yes, Bill Blair. And this the cost of policing for the G7 was, I believe, over $1 billion. Lots of overtime there, I guess. So Bill Blair is casting doubt on the Nova Scotia Mountie who suggested RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki interfered in the investigation into the largest mass shooting in Canadian history. The former public safety minister's comments come as the political firestorm around the head of the National Police Force spills into a second day. That explosive allegation was contained in handwritten notes from Nova Scotia RCMP Superintendent Darren Campbell, which were released Tuesday as part of the Mass Casualty Commission probe. The commission is investigating the April 18th and 19th, 2020 rampage and released a report Tuesday on the way the RCMP and government communicated with the public about the incident. In those notes, Campbell wrote that RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki was upset that the RCMP in Nova Scotia were not revealing more information about the weapons used because she had promised the federal government, which was considering gun control legislation at the time, that they would raise it. Yes, never let a crisis go to waste. Blair told reporters Wednesday the superintendent obviously came to his own conclusions, and his notes reflect that. But I'm telling you, and I would tell the superintendent if I spoke to him, I made no effort to pressure the RCMP to interfere in any way with their investigation. I gave no direction as to what information they should communicate. Those are operational decisions of the RCMP, and I respect that, and I've respected that throughout. Lucki has also denied interfering in the investigation. As a police officer and the RCMP commissioner, I would never take actions or decisions that could jeopardize an investigation, Lucki wrote in a statement released Tuesday. While the statement did not directly address the claim that she was pushing for the release of more information to help the Liberals' plans for gun control, Lucki wrote that briefings with the public safety minister are necessary, particularly during a mass shooting. Blair, who was the Minister of Public Safety at the time of the shooting spree, said he has faith in the commissioner who was appointed by the Liberal government in 2018. Here's another story from Post-Millennial. Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen spoke to reporters Wednesday regarding accusations made by Superintendent Darren Campbell that Brenda Lucki made a backroom deal with the Liberals to help promote a gun control agenda following the Nova Scotia mass shooting of 2020. She also voiced concerns over holding a parliamentary committee over the accusation, saying that she had little trust in the New Democrats to not help the Liberals cover up the findings. Yes, she said, right now they are denying wrongdoing. This is a pattern. This is what the Prime Minister does. You'll recall with SNC Lavalin, the Globe and Mail broke the story, and the Prime Minister looked in the camera and said, I did not pressure the Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould. We know now that that's not true. So when the Minister of Public Safety looks in the camera and says, I did not pressure the Commissioner, it is very, very difficult to believe that. And these same reporters will write these thumbsuckers about, the people increasingly do not trust the government, and they especially do not trust what the government says. I wonder why that might be. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Anrun, Denny McDougall, John S., Contra Coup. Anrun says they did do something. They stopped people trying to save their children. Chocokin 666 says, just found out the new building next door was zoned for low-income housing. Oh, dear. I'm very sorry to hear that. Your neighborhood is going to go to hell. Well, I'm sure you know that soon. Hello to Popcasso 88. Chocokin 666, one of the wealthiest zip codes in New York City. Hello to Gamion Jonathan Ferguson, who says, hello, fellow patriots. Hello to Dan. Contra-Coup says, during the 2020 mostly peaceful riots, the police exclusively protected the arsonists and looters. We should never forget that. Hello to Brian Frakes. Gamion says, I'm just amazed that it's the New Yorkers that are doing that. Don't they realize they are making it bad? David the Gnome comments on my appearance. Well, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I know it's a little gangsterish, perhaps. All the cops in the hall had, all they had was assault rifles and ballistic shields, says Brian Frakes. Jonathan Ferguson says, the most infuriating part is not their cowardice, but their blatant lying about various aspects of the event. Yes, Brian Frakes, KMG, is a gangsta. Oh, kind words from David the Gnome. Says he looks like a man about to tell me something important, like a dark noir sci-fi dystopian story, or make you an offer you cannot refuse, says Brian Frakes. David the Gnome says he's Irish, so he'd be a Westie if you remember that group. Jokerkin666 says this guy Arredondo is a real gem. Physiognomy matches integrity. David the Gnome asks, do cops even interact really with the non-cop population off work? I got the impression they kind of stick to their own. Jokerkin666 says, when the lies and calumny become too overwhelming, do we simply perish? Well, of course, you know, it's funny. You're familiar with the show Dragnet, and which was created by Jack Webb, and Adam 12, which was co-created by Jack Webb. And I was astonished some years ago to find out that Jack Webb, you know, champion of the police, took the very strong view that citizens should mind their own business and not try to save themselves. Just leave it to the cops. Oh yeah, when the guy who's knocking over my liquor store, you know, shoots me in the chest, and you know I can bleed out on the floor, and then you can come call the coroner to take my body away. This comes up again and again in those shows. Leave it to the police. More Sting talk. Hello to Kyle Fan. Hello to Bob Paxson, who comments that KMG is still in a hotel room like Mick Jagger. Okay. Let's talk about trans people. Trish Randall writes in The American Thinker, the first social contagion recognized in Western culture, if dimly, was the Werther effect. The name came from the title character in Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's 1774 novel of unrequited love and suicide, The Sorrows of Young Werther. Immediately and immensely popular, Werther was translated into multiple languages, including at least 20 bootleg editions within 12 years of publication. Werther's scenes and characters were reproduced on European products, from etchings to fans to ceramics and silhouettes of the beloved Lotte. The Werther costume of blue jacket, yellow waistcoat, trousers, and high black boots achieved popularity recent generations have seen in ripped jeans starting in the late 1960s and cosplay today. A Werther tract was worn by European aristocrats. Napoleon was a fan. Sadly, it wasn't the consumer products or the clothing fad that came to be known as the Werther effect. It was the noticeable rise in youth suicides. Since the heyday of Werthermania, the contagious element of suicide has been documented in research and informal observation. Often cited in media coverage of suicide's contagious aspect is the fact that after much media attention on Marilyn Monroe's death, the U.S. suicide total for the month that followed was 200 higher than would be expected based on normal trends. According to Psychology Today, suicide rates tend to increase following high-profile media coverage of suicide, especially if details, such as the method of suicide, are explicitly reported. I'll just interrupt here to say that we've had this disgusting spectacle in recent decades of suicide being valorized, that suicides are the best people because I don't know what they had the courage to kill themselves. And these terribly sad stories of some 14 or 15-year-old killing himself or herself because of bullying on social media and the like. And so when these children are hailed as heroes, what would anyone expect that the effect would be? I remember some years ago being disgusted by one of these stories. This suicide teen got a Catholic burial. Suicide is the gravest sin, according to the Catholic Church, because there's no hope of redemption. And so there's the priest at the funeral eulogizing this young 15-year-old or whatever who decided to top himself. And what sort of message did the priest give a thought to the message that he was sending to people? Hey, if life is hard and really hard sometimes, but if you kill yourself, that's the instant path to heaven. Back to the essay. Suicide rates among individuals who identify as transgender are consistently drastically higher than those of the general population. In 2016, rates of suicide attempts among transgender individuals were between 32 and 50%. In 2018, the Heritage Foundation reported suicide rates for individuals 15 years after surgical transition 20 times higher than that of the population overall. Even in Sweden, with long availability of transgender medications and surgeries and social acceptance of transgender individuals, the high suicide rate is consistent with rates in other locations. Trans activists consistently attribute high suicide rates to irrational hatred, bullying, and rejection targeted at the individual. However, according to Dr. Paul McHugh, formerly of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, the high numbers of suicides are usually years after surgery. The trigger, according to Dr. McHugh, is the persistent and undeniable reality that the genital surgery has not transformed the individual's sex, leading to despair. I remember years ago reading about a software designer who he had written a very popular 8-bit game called The Seven Cities of Gold, which was about exploration in the New World. And a lot of these trans people seem to be involved in tech. I wonder why. And he had gone through the transition, and he gave an interview. In the interview, he said, look, a lot of people are going to tell you that you were a man and you became a woman and you're going to be able to experience sex as a woman does. And he said, I can tell you from personal experience, that's not true. Back to the essay. Perhaps elevated rates of suicides and attempts among trans-identifying individuals should be no surprise. The whole point of transition is that an aspect of an otherwise healthy body is so unbearable as to justify a lifetime of artificial hormones and multiple irreversible surgeries. How short a step would it be from such unhappiness to enacting a plan to just end it all? There would be a sad logic to such an outcome. But the actual influences leading one to severely actionable unhappiness with a healthy body and being literally self-destructive are not only unlikely to align with explanations politically useful to activists, but very likely to extend to the larger social environment of these unhappy individuals. Psychology Today reports not only the contagious element of media coverage of suicides, but also that suicides can be contagious in a social group even without any media coverage. It was first posited by Lisa Littman in 2018 that the recent and rapid increase of transgender identities among adolescent girls was caused by social contagion, which she labeled rapid onset gender dysphoria. Parents reported that 36.8% of their children's social groups were majority trans, not merely including, but majority trans. The characteristics of girls assuming male identities: teen, female, 83%, non-heterosexual, 41%, diagnosed mental disorder, 62%, and close associates sharing the contagion are documented risk factors for experiencing a social contagion. In earlier decades, such girls were vulnerable to cutting or anorexia. Even sadder than the fact that many forms of distress are contagious is that contagiousness is not limited to negative mental states. Contagious mental conditions include cooperation and happiness. Unfortunately, our zeitgeist is such that intentionally designing social engagements as a platform for the contagious spread of happy and cooperative mindsets would be flung into the uncool bin faster than you could say Pollyanna. The vulnerability of adolescent females to social contagion is well documented, including specific vulnerabilities to depression, suicide attempts, and transgenderism. But just because there has been attention to contagious suffering among young females, that shouldn't cause us to assume that being an older adult or male reduces or prevents vulnerability to social contagion. Although rates of suicide attempts are high among teen girls, the highest rate of suicide deaths is among middle-aged men. Their already high rate rose 24% between 1999 and 2014. Men in midlife have also been increasingly claiming transgender identities. The specific characteristics among men who take their own lives include being veterans, rural residents, sexual or gender minorities, middle-aged, or tribal members. On the other hand, these can be seen as characteristics of men as individuals. On the other, they can be categories of social connections. The author writes, I strongly suspect that the link between attempting or completing suicide and identifying as transgender is more than just a statistical correlation. Suicide has long been known to be contagious with or without media coverage. Trans activists often cite elevated rates of attempts and suicides among trans individuals, forming potentially contagious links between suicide and trans identity. Social relationships among individuals that focus on trans identity and or trans political issues are another potential avenue for despair and fascination over suicide to spread to trans individuals. And Trish Randall concludes, there are two main reasons that the bully to suicide trope is untrue and unhelpful. First, the evidence is that the attitudes of society toward trans-identifying individuals and availability of artificial hormones and surgeries have no influence on the rate of suicide attempts and events among trans-identifying individuals. The second is a point of logic. If bullying targeting a trans-identifying individual was actually the key trigger of attempting suicide, that would mean that people who actively face-to-face hate the individual are the most powerful influences in that person's life. All the evidence gathered about social contagion so far indicates that it's the individual counts as friends. It's the people the individual counts as friends, allies, or people to be admired and imitated who are the most effective means of transmitting a contagious idea, mood, mindset, or behavior. As Abigail Schreier writes in her book, Irreversible Damage, which I highly commend to you, that these trans-identifying teens are told, you don't need your families. You're going to have a new family, a better family, a glitter family. Yes, they actually call it that. And of course, many of these girls, when their parents react with shock and say, no, you are not going to do this. You have, you're 11, 12 years old. You have no idea what's going on. And so the child typically says, if you don't let me do this, I will kill myself. And in most cases, the parents say, well, okay, then. So we've now devolved as a society to a state where terrorist threats are acceptable. Now, you all know the cliche about the child who says that he will hold his breath until he turns blue. And many people have seen this, including myself with children, that they will actually do this and then they will turn, purple, not blue, and stagger and, they'll be forced to breathe. But I suppose now, how long before parents are told if your child says that he's going to hold his breath until he turns blue, well, you have to give him what he wants. This is from Luke Gentile at the Washington Examiner. Hollywood star and Alphabet People activist Elliot Page called the negative attention that was received after transitioning unfortunate. Quote, I feel like it's one of those things where it's so unfortunate because it's like we're all on the same team here, whether you're transgender, nonconforming, cis, unquote. Page, a 35-year-old biological female who identifies as male, said in a Tuesday interview, we have these expectations and these sort of limits and constraints because of people's obsessions with the binary and how we're all supposed to live our lives. No, it's you people who have the obsession. As I like to say, there are only three genders, male, female, and nuisance. While the negativity is saddening, the actor chooses to focus on how life has improved post-transition, Page said. Yes, I can see what's going on here. Look at me, look at me, look at me. Why have you stopped looking at me? Do you know that I've embraced the truth of my life? A truth that was kept from me for 35 years? Why aren't you paying attention to me? Why isn't there a story about me? A big story about me every single day. Why aren't enough people applauding my bravery? Of course, no one seems to have mentioned, in this case of Elliot Page, that when Elliot Page came out as a lesbian, 15 years ago or so, of course, she, as Page was then, was applauded for her bravery and told that, this is not a choice. How dare you say this is a choice? Because sexuality is immutable. Oh, So she was immutably a lesbian, but then became a man, and men cannot be lesbians. So how does that work? Of course, since the argument that sexuality is immutable, we have the whole non-binary. Oh, well, you go back and forth, and there's lots of people who say, "Oh, yeah, I go back and forth all the time between male and female." So apparently, sexuality is not uh, immutable. But don't wait for those people who lectured us sternly, often with threats, that sexuality is immutable to apologize for this, or even to mention how they were wrong. Respectable commenting name says all mental illness seems to be contagious for a large amount of the population. Also, suicide celebrators are strangely silent when you ask them to practice what they preach. Well, as I've long said, I do not like to be around crazy people because it is my firm belief that insanity is a communicable disease. Bob Paxton says KMG needs a green screen of HAL 9000 behind him. David the Gnome says I would prefer a Celtic village. Hello to I, Judas Fly Chai. Who else do we have here? Kevin, would you do a Christmas Carol for the book club? I might read it. Next Christmas. Who else do we have here? Any new names? Hello to Yo Mama. I hated her in Juno, says Gamion. I hated that movie. All pop culture references, they're everywhere, right? What if you made a movie that was entirely pop culture references? And when Juno goes into labor, she screams, "Thundercats are go!" Ooh, that's a pretty recondite reference there, Juno. Yeah. I joked after watching that movie that it made me think that the possession of acoustic guitars should be made illegal. Another thing that Sarah, Michael Sarah fellow, who knocks her up immediately. Oh yeah, well you're pregnant, and I did it, so I can't be with you anymore. Why not? She can't get any more pregnant. Reasonable and responsible, a new name. Hello, and don't expect an explanation for Bill de Blasio's wife, who prior to marrying him had declared herself a proud, unequivocal lesbian. Yes, many such cases. Many such cases. And, oh, yeah. Okay. Kamala Harris, poor Kamala Harris. Yeah. She's the vice president of the United States. Now, there have been exceptions. Well, one exception, Dick Cheney, W, handed much of the presidential responsibility over to him directly. It seems to me rather dubious in a constitutional sense. But the job of the vice president is to cut ribbons and attend the funerals of lesser foreigners. John Nance Garner, who was two-time vice president under FDR, famously said that the vice presidency was worth a warm pitcher of piss. But everyone is being so mean to Kamala Harris. This is again by Luke Gentile at the Washington Examiner. Harris's low approval rating is not the product of her time in office, but rather her portrayal in a white and male media, according to MSNBC's Joy Reid. The white male media will not let Harris, whose approval rating sits at 41%, put her personality on display, Reid said in an interview published Sunday. Once again, Joy Ann Reid, the dumbest woman on television. This is the same Kamala Harris who told her that her running shoes, her Converses, define her. This is the same Kamala Harris who made up lies about listening to Tupac Shakur and smoking dope at a time when Tupac Shakur didn't even have a rapping career before he made a record. This is the same woman who was asked, "Who's your favorite rapper?" You know, she said, "Tupac Shakur." You know, Tupac is dead, right? Everybody knows that Tupac is dead. Apparently not you, though, because you obviously have no interest in rap music. So Joy Reid told The Root, she's just a regular sister in the same way people would always say that Michelle Obama is like if your cousin became first lady. Kamala Harris is like if your cousin became VP of the United States. Oh, she's a regular sister, is she? Kamala Harris is, I don't know what, about 1/3 of black. But she is half Tamil Brahmin, and she was raised in Westmount, Montreal, one of the richest neighborhoods in Canada. One of the things that Kamala Harris has regularly done is express her astonishment that Joe Biden loves ice cream. And I previously joked that, that Kamala Harris, was raised in Canada, so she wouldn't know that Americans love ice cream. But then I remembered Canadians love ice cream too. Reid continued, I think she doesn't get to show that personality often enough, and so people haven't had a chance to get to know her. You mean the nervous cackling that we get from her in every appearance, or that there is hardly a picture extent of her where she has this rictus, her mouth wide open? A negative narrative propagated by traditional white and male media has shrouded the vice president, according to Reid. She is often displayed as an ineffective leader who stumbles when delivering remarks. That is an unfair and untrue reflection of her abilities, Reid said. Most of the media is still white and male, and their take on Kamala Harris becomes the take. It becomes conventional wisdom. The job she's had is dead serious, and this time is so serious. Think about her portfolio: voting rights, immigration and the border, and police reform. The things on her plate are the toughest things that the Biden administration has to deal with outside of inflation and the war in Ukraine. Harris provided President Joe Biden the black female vote. Nope, Reid added. I think sometimes the cynicism of our politics makes us forget how important she is and what she represents for us. Oh, yeah, because there's never been a female vice president before, or a part black vice president before. Wait a minute. A man called Barack Obama served 2 terms as president, and he's half black. But let's all forget that happened, because Kamala Harris is just so darn historic. But wait, there's more been heaped on Kamala Harris's plate. This is from Alexander Hall at Fox News. VP Kamala Harris announced the launch of a task force to address online harassment and abuse Thursday at the White House. Harris praised the task force in her remarks as a means for societal progress, saying no one should have to endure abuse just because they are attempting to participate in society. A memo on the task force released by the White House condemned gendered disinformation. What? What could that possibly be? And proclaimed the administration will be developing programs and policies to address online harassment, abuse, and disinformation campaigns targeting women and alphabet people, individuals who are public and political figures, government and civic leaders, activists, and journalists in the United States and globally. Yes, it's nice to know that journalists will be protected. They have such difficult lives, lightly rewriting government press releases and tossing softball questions at so-called experts, particularly now experts on mis and disinformation. This gender disinformation, I'm really looking forward to where they're going with that one. Gamian says, OMG, I've been looking for the word rictus for so long. Thank you. Well, my pleasure. Picasso 88 says my favorite flavor of ice cream is mango raspberry from Haagen-Dazs. Why did they put wire foot cages on Biden's bike? But he claimed that the clips or whatever. I don't understand that. He's not racing the bicycle. How fast was he going? Somewhere around 10 miles an hour, maybe. What? So they're going to strap his feet to the bike? Maybe he simply forgot that had happened, and that's why he fell off the bike, and then even worse, somehow ended up in the middle of the bike. Hello to Leponius Maximus Meridius. Dancing Ben says, not to defend Harris, but why can't you like a dead singer, rapper, whatever? Well, the context of the question was that who's your favorite rapper? I mean, today, because you know that Barack Obama, he regularly drops these Spotify lists because Barack, he's just so into music, including contemporary music. He's really on top of that, which I do not believe for a second, because it takes a lot of time, particularly in the fractured pop music world that exists now, to keep up. It takes a lot of time. The Right Honorable says, I remember Harris on CNN during the campaign telling us not to take the vax while Trump was in office, as if he personally administered the doses. Yes, that's very amusing. Trump isn't doing enough about the corona doom. And, Trump says warp speed for the vaccines. And the vaccines were ready to go before the election. But Pfizer, for some reason, decided not to announce this. And, yes, Kamala Harris says, no, this Trump vaccine. And then Biden becomes president, and suddenly he's taking credit for the vaccine. And that hasn't worked out too well for him. Che Blutarski says, if Kamala ever gets the POTUS job, I put the over-under on how much longer the country will survive at 3 weeks. I'll never get over, says David the Gnome, the photo of Harris, the Harris photo as one of Montel Williams' groupies. Pelcasso 88 says KMG's review of Juno on his old blog is the first piece of his I've ever read. Oh, someone's been paying attention for a long time. I abandoned that, around 2008, 2009, something like that. Cotto thinks Meghan Markle will run in 2024, says Oscar To. Please run. Please, please, please run, Meghan Markle. Joe needs an ice cream cone basket on his bike, too, says Oscar To. Alrighty. And, yes, let's talk about poetry. Poetry is something that has died in my lifetime, as has the short story. That has died in my lifetime. The novel, pretty much dead. Except, bonk busters, women getting their groove back. Men have pretty much stopped reading novels entirely, except for historical fiction. Ben Sexsmith writes at the excellent site iam1776.com. A few years ago, I had a phase of reading literary biographies. I planned to write the fictitious biography of an Italian Jewish pulp fiction author who was catapulted to mainstream literary success as a practical joke by Gore Vidal. Plus, it took less work than reading literature. It was a good way to be disillusioned. Some of the books offered no surprises. Kingsley Amis drank a lot and was angry. Norman Mailer fought a lot and was angry. Evelyn Waugh was Catholic and angry. John Updike was middle class and had lots of affairs. Actually, that book had one surprise. Updike was college pals, it turns out, with Christopher Lasch. Yes, the greatest poet of post-war narcissism was buddies with his greatest critic. When the others had surprises, they were generally grim. I had always thought that Arthur Koestler must have been a relatively twinkly chap, but the parade of F-ups detailed in Michael Scammel's The Skeptic made his habit of drunk driving look like one of his more endearing characteristics. The most depressing of the books I read was the biography of Philip Larkin. No one knows who knows anything about Philip Larkin would have approached the book expecting a cheerful time. Still, the gloomy atmosphere was relentless. Larkin did not shoot his wife like William Burroughs, or stab his wife like Norman Mailer, or commit double suicide with his healthy younger wife like Arthur Koestler. In fact, he never had the stomach to get married. The man was forever caught between bemoaning his lack of female attention and fearing that which he received. Beyond this, Larkin was consistently depressed, morbid, crass, and misanthropic. The admirer of his poems, reading Andrew Motion's biography, shifts in their seat as they read Hull's finest trade reviews of BDSM magazines with his dwindling number of friends, or write little poems about his wish to see poor people starve. One thing about Philip Larkin, he was an exceedingly ugly man. I mean, Philip Larkin makes me look like Brad Pitt, you know. He was chased by women. Women were always chasing him. He was having to, fend them off. And so I guess, being regarded as a top poet had more sexual market value back in those days. Back to Sex Smith. Alan Bennett had an even stronger reaction to reading a biography of W.H. Auden. Auden was wise to want no biography written, he commented. The more one reads about him, the harder it is to see round him to the poetry beyond. Well, there are two things to say. Firstly, how many of us would welcome the chance to have our private experiences, emails, and DMs exposed to the world? Okay, I've never wished death on poor people or stabbed my wife, but I'm sure it would be embarrassing nonetheless, and I feel safe in saying that it would embarrass the average person. Secondly, how much should one connect the life of an artist with their creations? A crowd-pleasing answer is not at all. Separate the art from the artist. Arthur Koestler had nothing to do with Darkness at Noon. I don't even know who Norman Mailer is. While this salvages art with convenient haste, there is at least some extent to which it lets down its creators. Art transcends an individual mind if it has any value, but expresses some of its qualities nonetheless. Literature does not emerge from a vacuum. When Larkin wrote Faith Healing, for example, about the immense slackening ache of common women seeking kindness and connection, he was expressing himself as much, if not more so, as when he groused malignantly about the working classes. When he wrote lines on a young lady's photograph album about a real girl in a real place, his tenderness was as true as his spite when he denounced womankind. Nothing can excuse his treatment of the perpetually unproposed to Monica Jones, but no one who reads an Arundel tomb could claim that he had no heart. Quote, time has transfigured them into untruth. The stone fidelity they hardly meant has come to be their final blazon, and to prove our almost instinct, almost true, what will survive of us is love, unquote. Similarly, Auden might, as Bennett said, have been something of a domestic nuisance and romantic fool, but he was still a man who looked across Ischia and wrote, when I try to imagine a faultless love or the life to come, what I hear is the murmur of underground streams. What I see is a limestone landscape. This is deserving of attention, not just to redeem poets, but because there is a sense in which poetry redeems us all. Much of human life is inevitably unpleasant. A great deal of human speech and thought is doubly so: boring, petty, snide, deceitful, crass, and cowardly. If a lifetime's worth of words could be arranged in one place, it will resemble a heap of detritus studded with dog turds, condoms, and needles. But there can be gold. Poems shine like nothing else. Poetry concentrates speech and thought down to their purest forms. At its best, it is language at its most beautiful, not because it is pleasant and flowery, though it can be, but because it is vivid, elegant, and truthful. That which is morbid and sad can be included, to be sure, but not that which is thoughtless, careless, dishonest, and confused. It is, as Czesław Miłosz said, the passionate pursuit of the real. I'll tell you a story about that Polish scholar. A friend of mine, a university professor, was at a conference in which Miłosz was to be the number one speaker and, the headliner of the conference. And there was this other professor there whose job it was to introduce him. And he painstakingly learned how to pronounce his name. He went over it over and over and over and over. My friend saw him repeating it. And so when it came to the introduction at the end, after all the praise, he said, "And now I present to you Chishlish Mishlish." Anyway, back to Sexsmith. Some of the beauty lies in that which the poets describe when Robinson Jeffers, that great literary misanthrope, who commented in one of his poems that he would sooner accept the penalties, kill a man than a hawk, describes the animals around his Californian home. It evokes the savage beauty of the natural world. But there is also inherent beauty in being able to evoke a scene and its significance such that it resonates with people from another time and place. That is a human gift. That is poetry. The marginalization of poetry in the modern world is a phenomenon I am not enough of a scholar to critique with great insight and force. My suspicion, though, is that it suffers from its narrowing and desiccation, to quote Milosz again, at its higher end and the free falling of standards in its popular forms. John Betjeman wrote poems. Rupi Kaur writes half-literate Instagram updates. Beyond this, we have an impoverished sense of what poems can do to us, for us. We do not know what is for. A poem does not have the immediate captivating qualities of a painting or a photograph. One has to read rather than look at it. A poem rarely provides the engrossing entertainment of a novel or a film or a serial. Is poetry educative? An embarrassing, bland, chirpy piece in praise of poems that I wrote as a bright, young, bushy-tailed opinion columnist mentions connecting with history and understanding other perspectives among aspects of their appeal. To be sure, any form of art contains the capacity to inspire moral and intellectual elevation, or indeed moral and intellectual decline. Here, though, its powers are limited. If nothing else, a shaft of light into a room leaves ample space for darkness. But to dwell on questions of functionality is to miss the point. What poetry inspires is resonance. One experiences truth at its most vivid. This can be a call, if not a virtue, then to existential seriousness. The babbling of our lives, which can be pleasant, but which can be trivial, is pierced by the sound of trumpets or of thunder or of hawks. It is a sound which echoes in our minds. It is a sound which stills. That resonance depends on style as much as subject, still less sentiment. April is the cruelest month. What does it mean? I'm damned if I know, but we remembered it. Many good-hearted poems about the horrors of war, meanwhile, have sunk into the mud. Their message was righteous, but it could have just been said. Still, poets must speak to the world. Pure abstraction has no resonance. Even the joy of mathematics is the joy of discovery. I hope that poetry enriches life in a holistic sense. I hope that it can make us more appreciative, sensitive, passionate, grounded, thoughtful, knowledgeable, and wise. Some people claim to have had such experiences. Yet the impact of a poem can be enough. Amid the ceaseless chatter of 21st century society is enough to be stopped in your tracks by the ringing of a church bell or the howl of a wolf. In such moments, life means something, and its meaning can be measured not just by words, but by the tingle in our spine or the lump in our throat. And again, this is from Ben Sixsmith at im1776.com. Evelyn Waugh was angry, not all the time, but he was also one of the funniest men who ever lived. He lived to make people laugh, not just in his books, but in his life. Kingsley Amis drank a lot and was angry. That is true. But he is, again, one of the funniest writers ever. His books are extraordinarily funny. Right from the very first one, Lucky Jim. And meanwhile, Monica Jones, who mentioned in this essay with regard to Philip Larkin, Monica Jones was the horrendous woman, Margaret, the clinging woman who attempts suicide. An attempt to bind Jim to her was based on Monica Jones. Now, everybody, well, a large number of people knew this. I mean, people in Larkin and Amis's circle. And one would have thought that she would have been so mortified that she would never have anything to do with Larkin again. But people are funny. Here's a piece from Robert Weisberg at the American Thinker, Manufacturing Social Justice Warriors on an Industrial Scale. For over half a century, American institutions of higher education have been guilty of promoting oikophobia, hatred of one's own people, and more generally, Western civilization. Instruction initially only occurred in traditional academic disciplines such as English and sociology, where youngsters learned about America's racism, sexism, and multiple other sins. Within a few years, America bashing had its very own departments, notably women's studies, black studies, and other grievance studies department. Well, I'll comment on this. The student revolt of the 1960s, the demands, two of the most popular demands were for we need black studies departments, and we need women's studies departments. And then later, we need queer studies departments, or whatever they called at the time. And I suppose that the people in charge of the academies thought, okay, this is nonsense, but these people are very angry and we need to calm them down. So we'll let them have their specious departments. But we're going to wall off the rest of the academy from this suppurating nonsense. Well, it didn't work, did it? Weisberg continues. We got two going. I think I'm just going to list. Oh, wait. The latest installment of this national suicide and the installment urge is the burgeoning field of social justice as a separate academic major. This is not just sneaking in some criticism of America's in a traditional history course, nor some freshman orientation lecture to exercise white privilege. Far worse, this is ROTC for the woke. The parallel are faith-based schools who train missionaries to spread the gospel. But unlike traditional missionary programs targeting heathens, these freshly minted preachers will spread the doctrine of woke to the elite. Why proselytize among the poor when you can preach the gospel at national public radio? Academic programs in social justice are rapidly multiplying, and this includes our most prominent institutions such as Brandeis University, Rice, Smith, and Columbia, plus multiple less prestigious schools. There are also numerous master's programs whose existence signifies that being a social justice warrior is a certified profession akin to social work. Such professional programs exist at Cornell, the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, Columbia, George Mason, Harvard, and elsewhere. Long ago are the days when fighting against injustice was a voluntary career for unemployed rabble-rousers. Well, Barack Obama certainly made bank doing this. What do you do for a living? I'm a community activist. What does that mean, actually? And if they were to tell the truth, well, I tell these people to be angry and to shout and to wave their fists, and then the government will give them money. Consider CCNY's Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. Its radical agitprop agenda for CCNY undergrads is hardly hidden. Quote, Racial Justice Fellows program will continue to place students at the center of efforts to create systemic change, creating a pipeline for students to become deeply involved in anti-racist movements, unquote. Its workshops will train students to reform the criminal justice system, fight voter suppression, empower Black communities, address environmental justice concerns, and close the racial education gap. The program's faculty is predictably heavy on social activism and light on traditional scholarship. I don't know, so many of these universities, and I suppose, if Columbia is involved, then it goes right to the top. I don't know how they can live with themselves when they hand out doctorate degrees in things like leadership awesome sauce. You know how many programs there are that confer, MA and doctorate degrees on various aspects of leadership? It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So, experts. Don't you just hate them? I know I do. It's a piece by Andrew Doyle at unheard.com. With most of the world's information only a click away, one would have assumed that ours would be the most enlightened generation in human history. We may have lost the rote learning skills and depth of knowledge of our grandparents, but we know where to find the facts and can do so in an instant. For all that, many of us have developed the habit of reading multiple accounts of any given news item because so often reports are filtered through an ideological lens. There was, for instance, Omar Jimenez's coverage of protests in Kenosha for CNN, described as mostly peaceful, in the Chiron running under the report in spite of the clearly visible backdrop of burning cars and buildings. Similarly, the BBC was roundly mocked for its description of largely peaceful protests in London, in which 27 police officers were injured. Instinctively, it feels as though these reporters must be peddling these untruths knowingly, perhaps out of a misguided sense of paternalistic responsibility to prevent further discord. But even more troubling is the possibility that they have bought into their own fictions. If one accepts the postmodernist belief that our experiences are solely constructed through the language with which they are expressed, then to describe an event as largely peaceful makes it so. Well, these days we can meme things into existence, can't we? When was I know of this word? I've known of this word disinformation for some time. You come across it, for instance, in discussions of spycraft, to give one example. But misinformation, disinformation, the media they meme this into existence, that they are the sole arbiters of the truth, and anyone who disagrees with them is guilty of peddling misinformation, disinformation. And there's no doubt in my mind that they firmly believe this, even though there is absolutely no evidence for it. And the idea that truth is something which can be, nailed down, it's far more complicated than that. Back to our essay. Such blunders are only the most egregious examples of the kind of white lies and misrepresentations we find on an almost daily basis in the national press. Occasionally, there is a backlash, such as when the BBC modified the quotation of a rape victim so that her attacker was not misgendered. But on the whole, this routine twisting of the truth goes unnoticed. We have grown accustomed to reporters telling us what to think about a story rather than simply relaying the key facts and leaving us to judge for ourselves. Even reputable academic journals are willing to jettison inconvenient truths if they better suit their desired reality. When the New England Journal of Medicine argued that sex designations on birth certificates offer no clinical utility, few of us were surprised. The Journal of the Royal Society of Chemistry has even produced new guidelines to minimize the risk of publishing inappropriate or otherwise offensive content. If the truth hurts, it ought to be avoided. When journalists, academics, and politicians advance a worldview in direct opposition to observable reality, they risk creating what Jürgen Habermas once described as a legitimation crisis, by which trust in figures of authority is irreparably depleted. This seems particularly germane given reports this week that the head of the World Health Organization privately believes that COVID-19 leaked from a laboratory in Wuhan. It wasn't that long ago that the scientific consensus dismissed this as little more than a racist conspiracy theory. Throughout the pandemic, we saw experts silenced or marginalized if they offered views that deviated from the accepted narrative. YouTube videos that posited the lab leak theory were removed. An unheard interview featuring Professor Carol Sikora was taken offline after he suggested that the virus was likely to burn out and that levels of public immunity had been underestimated. Wasn't this former advisor to the WHO entitled to an opinion? Meanwhile, experts who peddle accepted narratives remain free to indulge in blatant untruths that we are expected to take on trust. In June 2020, more than 1,200 medical practitioners signed a letter arguing that existing restrictions put in place to curb the spread of coronavirus ought not to apply to Black Lives Matter demonstrations. The epidemiologist Jennifer Nuzzo wrote, quote, "We should always evaluate the risks and benefits of efforts to control the virus. In this moment, the public health risks of not protesting to demand an end to systemic racism greatly exceed the harms of the virus." Unquote. Are we to believe that the virus would take some time off so long as the protesters' cause was just? The figures of authority are so often caught in lies has brought about an erosion of confidence in our institutions. I barely scraped a GCSE in biology, but when esteemed scientific journals are publishing authors who maintain that sex is a spectrum, It gives the false impression that my understanding of the subject is superior to theirs. Experts appear to have forgotten that the legitimacy of their claims is grounded in evidence and research, not by waving around a doctoral certificate. Perhaps this is why we are now so familiar with the spectacle of academics humiliating themselves on social media. As Helen Pluckrose once pointed out to me, it's a worry when you can't tell whether the person yelling at you is a 12-year-old whose parents need to take their Twitter account away or a professor of sociology. While we may laugh at the truculent behavior of authority figures degrading themselves, this, after all, is the basis of traditional farce, there is a sinister aspect to all of this. When experts are so patently captured by an ideology, they surrender their capacity to think critically, and that's not good news for any of us. Doyle continues, in some cases, this deviation from the truth is deliberate and tactical. Consider, for instance, the phenomenon that Peter Boghossian describes as idea laundering. The process begins with a moral impulse among certain ideologically driven academics. Journals are founded, papers are published, classes are taught, and before long, what was once the vaguest intuition is supported by a body of academic literature. Boghossian offers the example of fat studies, an area of study which seeks to lend credence to the view that the clinical concept of obesity, a medical term, is merely a story we tell ourselves about fat, a descriptive term. It's not true or false. In this particular case, it's a story that exists within a social power dynamic that unjustly ascribes authority to medical knowledge. What begins as a fanciful theory emerges as knowledge through this laundering process. It explains why a notion as nebulous as whiteness is now so widely and uncritically accepted. Ideas that have little basis in reality emerge from universities as de facto truths, and those brave enough to challenge them are quickly and mercilessly subdued. And while most of us are happy to conform for the sake of an easy life, our trust in those institutions supposedly dedicated to the production of knowledge quickly deteriorates. And Doyle concludes, skepticism about experience is important. No human being is infallible or free from bias, however well qualified. Yet at the same time, we rely on figures in authority with specialist insight for the practical business of living. When journalists begin to conflate truth and fictions, or when academics substitute wishful thinking for empirical knowledge, we are left unmoored from reality. For the sake of our collective sanity, we need to restate the primacy of the truth. Well, if you're a postmodernist, there's no such thing as the truth, is there? Speaking of experts, this is from Jennifer Ferreira at CTV News. Here's why experts say Canada isn't headed for a recession. I read that headline and I thought, there's going to be a recession. Maybe worse than that. She begins, Canada's annual inflation rate hit 7.7% for the month of May. Yeah. Who believes this? Anyone who goes to the grocery store or go to a restaurant or whatever, do you believe that inflation is 7.7%? Have you looked at what cars cost these days? Yeah, well, there's this concept called hedonics. Oh, well, see, doesn't really cost that much more because it's so much better than it used to be. Oh, so my new smartphone is 20% bigger than it used to be, or 20% thinner or whatever. So that means that you got to subtract that from the increase in price. That's generally how it works. Also, the consumer price index typically leaves out of its basket things that people buy, like healthcare in the United States, and university fees, and real estate, rent, that sort of thing. 7.7%, yes. With inflation reaching astronomical levels, some Canadians may be concerned that rising costs will lead to a decline in economic activity and eventually trigger a recession. Michael Veal is an economics professor at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. Looking at the latest levels of economic activity in Canada, the country isn't currently in a recession, he said, nor is it likely to experience one anytime soon. If real GDP growth is negative for 2 successive quarters, that's formally a recession, Veal told CTV News. Yes, everybody knows that. It's clear that we're still in a period of bounce-back growth from the pandemic. One key characteristic of economic recessions is a high rate of unemployment, Field said, but the most recent data from Statistics Canada shows the country's unemployment rate is an all-time low of 5.1%. Well, the unemployment rate no longer includes people who have given up looking for work. So when Joe Biden boasts about how low the unemployment rate in the United States, he's not going to tell you about, last time I looked, something like 95 million people in the United States have stopped looking for work. Recessions are also characterized by negative economic growth, said TD Bank senior economist James Marple. According to TD Bank's most recent forecast published Monday, Canada's economic activity expected to slow down dramatically in the months to come. The bank predicts that real GDP will have grown at an annualized rate of 4.4% by the end of June, before this number drops to 3% by the end of the third quarter and 1.6% by the end of 2022. Yes, experts say. So three of them are quoted. You might think that you would find someone who thinks that maybe there is going to be a recession. No. Journalists don't do that anymore. But you will recall, if you're old enough, and I'm assuming most of my listeners are, that right up to the time of the housing crash, all of the experts said on a daily basis, bubble? What bubble? There's no bubble. The housing industry is healthy. It's solid, and it's only going to get better. That's what they said. Pretty much all of them. And who is it? Schiff said he was mocked. I saw him mocked on TV by Ben Stein, who's an economist as well as a comedian, just mocking him. What are you talking about? Come on, you must be nuts. Housing market's great. Yeah, Jose Rodriguez, who works as a janitor, gets a mortgage. And how does he get a mortgage? Because the Bank of America gets a hold of him and said, how would you like to own your own house? Si, senor. But no, I don't earn enough. What are you talking about? No. We're the Bank of America. We're the experts, and we think that you can buy a house. In fact, you deserve a house. And you know what? We are so confident in you that we're going to give you a $10,000 bonus if you sign these papers. And apparently the experts thought that there was nothing untoward about, janitor Jose Rodriguez being, given a mortgage by the Bank of America and a $10,000 bonus. Let's go back to the chat. Here we are. Isn't Peter Schiff about the only one who predicted it? Says the Right Honorable. He was one of the very few. Don Willis compares me to Joe Jackson on the cover of Look Sharp. Well, thank you. And it says Kevin is dressed like an extra from The Long Good Friday today. That is one of the great British gangster films. Now we get a pod once this economy wrecks us into begging for one. It's not gambling if you always win, says Cincy Blackie. Well, the banks and the financial institutions, except for Lehman Brothers, we need a sacrificial lamb. So we'll kill off Lehman. Everyone else gets made whole. Why weren't there riots in the streets? Of course, John Milius famously called for show trials and public executions of the people on Wall Street. And he was absolutely enraged at Rush Limbaugh sticking up for those creeps. Respectable commenting name says, if anything, you can take pride in not succumbing to the most intense psychological operation in history. And he adds, if I'm judging by my grocery bill, inflation is between 30 and 50%. Couldn't Prince write Kate Bush some songs? Kate Bush is in the news again. She's been a very reclusive figure for some years now. She doesn't give interviews, and I don't even know whether there's recent photographs of her. I mean, occasionally, the newspapers will try to track her down in her country retreat. But one of her songs was used in some popular TV program, and it shot to the top of the charts. Enron needs to lay off the Philip Larkin poetry, says Oscar Toe. Philip Larkin is really quite good. YouTube has plagued me with Kate Bush vids, says Oscar Toe. Don Willis says, I'm so relieved that old Joe is trying to take federal taxes off gas just when you thought he was out of ideas. What's next? Postponement of paying IRS for a year? Had a meeting with the House, with a full House of these people as part of a grant that required a public meeting. There were no public at this meeting. Everyone was on the clock. The Right Honorable. Yeah, but you know that this is what they call stakeholders, right? And stakeholders are typically someone who have a pecuniary interest in the subject. The Right Honorable again says, a community activist is someone who accepts federal grant money for a living. I realized this on an engineering project I was working on this year. It would be very useful, I think, for someone, economist perhaps. I don't think you'd need to be an economist, someone adept to statistics, to calculate how much of the American GDP is parasitism. How much is it? It's not just government parasitism and NGO parasitism, but the parasitism that exists in private companies, particularly Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies. You have all these people with these grand titles. What do they do? No, seriously, what do they do? Oh, well, our company has acknowledged that we need to do better. What, you need to raise profits, your share price? No, we need to do better in terms of acknowledging America's systemic racism and white supremacy, homophobia, sexism, and like. How does this benefit our company exactly? Okay. And now, where are we now? Yeah, we got the time. We have the time. It's back to Tainter, talking about the depopulation of the Mayan Empire. Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. The radiocarbon dates associated with elite and commoner archaeological contexts confound an interpretation of a simple relationship between collapse and depopulation. As compiled by Sidris and Berger, radiocarbon dates from elite contexts rise to a peak in the mid-8th century and, as expected, thereafter decline sharply. In contrast, dates from commoner contexts follow no such pattern and give no evidence of a concurrent peasant population crash. Some points need to be mentioned about this pattern. The sample size of commoner-associated dates is small, and there's a real possibility of significant sampling error or even bias. Keeping these points in mind, the patterns graphed by Sidris and Berger are provocative. There is no reason at this point to suggest that the collapse and depopulation were unrelated. There is, however, ample basis for suggesting that the relationship between them was complex and varied across space and time. Further research into the terminal classic and post-classic population decline is certainly needed. The collapse affected each site according to the peculiarities of its circumstances. It was transmitted between centers, though, as distressed cities raided and caused devastation among their neighbors, and as support populations moved to less affected areas. The behavior of post-collapse populations is best illustrated at Tickle. Population at the center may have declined by 90% or more, leaving a remnant band of 1,000 to 2,000 persons. Tickle's sustaining area shows a corresponding drop. The Esnab occupation from circa 830 to 900 AD was by an impoverished population that attempted to carry on a semblance of classic ceremonialism. The Esnab people lived in the great vaulted structures and deposited their refuse in courtyards, down stairways, even within rooms. When these structures deteriorated, there was no rebuilding. Esnab constructions were small and rudimentary, and their pottery compares unfavorably with the technical perfection of classic ceramics. Esnab burials are in the same places as classic elites, but contain minimal accompaniments. Classic tombs and caches were raided. The attempts at imitating classic ceremonialism betray the loss of classic elite knowledge. As many as 40% of Tikal stelae were reset by the Esnab occupants, but this was done improperly by classic standards, i.e. in the wrong places or upside down. With the departure or demise of this remnant population, the political and demographic collapses at Tikal were complete. Similar patterns are seen at such sites as Huacatun, San Jose, Palenque, and Piedras Negras. The rural population of Barton Ramey shows analogous behavior because although the post-collapse occupation was extensive, new construction was comparatively minimal. Yet the collapse was not uniform across the lowlands. The Puuc sites of the northern lowland shows a terminal classic occupation that is in no way diminished from former times, and which may have even been assisted by populations fleeing the southern disaster. Nor is any collapse evident at the Belizean site of Lamini. Yet as a whole, the southern lowlands were struck by what one authority describes as the most devastating demographic and cultural disjuncture prehistoric Mesoamerica ever experienced. And tomorrow, I will go back to Tainter and start with his assessment of the Maya collapse. So, why do we listen to people from Hollywood about anything? You know, they might have some useful things to say about acting, you know, if they're good actors. But apart from that, why do we listen to them? You know, we all know about the Me Too movement, that apparently Hollywood is a cesspit of sexual predation. And, you know, we all know the stories about, you know, Bryan Singer and the like. So it's not just women that are the victims of predation. It's men, even boys. But they just won't stop telling us what's what. So a movie bombs. And what's the reason for it? Well, increasingly, Hollywood says it's your fault, you bad people. You know, blaming the audience, that's not a good sales strategy, but they just keep doing it. I guess that's what this first started with Cat Lady Ghostbusters, you know? Oh, we made a beautiful film, but you people are just such bigots that you didn't appreciate it. Well, you know, the old Hollywood understood that you really can't browbeat people into, you know, putting up their money for something or for saying that they liked the movie when they didn't. So this is a piece at the Federalist by Hans, how does he pronounce it? Fine. In German, it would be Fina. And it's called Childless Chris Evans' Inspiring Condemnation of Anti-Alphabet People Bigots. Evans, yes. This fellow, Hans Fiena, is a Lutheran pastor. Without doubt, those who favor alphabet people acceptance are morally superior to those who believe the various forms of homosexuality to be sinful. Alphabet people advocates are good and holy and virtuous. Their cause is so just that there is never a reason for them to question their moral assumptions. Don't listen to those divisive spirits who tell you otherwise. The bigots of this world imagine themselves to be quite clever. To rattle you, they will insist that you wouldn't have to aggressively propagandize young children if it were abundantly clear that alphabet people identities are equal to cis-normative ones. To make you doubt the justice of your cause, they will confuse you with statistics and appeal to outdated concepts like biology, claiming that straight religious couples with functioning compatible genitalia and a high view of children tend to procreate at much higher rates than both gay couples and those whose ovaries and testicles are currently decomposing in medical waste landfills. Next, when you remind them that they're on the wrong side of history, they'll repeat the debunked claim that history is more likely to be written by those who exist than those who don't. What should you do then when their deceptive words are humming in your ears? Where can you turn when you're haunted by the lie that the breeders and believers will inherit the earth and dash to pieces your child drag queen Shangri-La? Thank science for Chris Evans. Recently, Disney Pixar released its newest animated feature, Lightyear, a film that bravely gave cinematic representation to the world's most underrepresented demographic, slightly gay secondary characters whose homosexuality is prominent enough to annoy cultural moderates, but not enough to lose their money. Oops. In response to the criticism of the bigots who complain about the presence of a same-sex kiss in a film for children, Evans, the voice of this version of Buzz Lightyear, spoke bluntly in a recent interview with Reuters Television, insisting that those who oppose alphabet people characters in children's films are not worthy of your concern. Their complaints will perish with them. Their bigotry will be swept into the dustbin of history. You simply need to wait for them to enter extinction. To understand why his words are so comforting, it's important to remember that Evans is an unmarried 41-year-old man with no children. Had his words been spoken by a man who sired offspring, they would be of no comfort to you. Had this malediction been declared by a man with a dedicated commitment to fathering children to whom he could pass on his beliefs, these words would have carried little weight. In fact, they would only have reinforced the false notions that demographics is ideological destiny and that children won't prefer one mommy and one daddy to two daddies and three them parents unless they become victims of Baptist brainwashing. Evans' lack of children, therefore, gives much greater weight to his insistence that all alphabet people opponents will go the way of the dodo. How could you not be comforted by the glorious confidence of this man who has reached middle age and yet has 0 children to enroll in Miss Naughty's preschool for drag princesses? If kidless Captain America is certain that transgender 8-year-olds will still be a thing when the children of anti-alphabet people, Christians, Mormons, and Muslims inherit the earth, why should we fear? Evans said of the homophobic brigade objecting to the film, the real truth is those people are idiots. Indeed, they are. And you should be so confident of their idiocy that you do not fear foregoing procreation and leaving the children of your ideological enemies to continue your march towards queer justice. They'll gladly oblige. The film star added, every time there's been social advancement as we wake up, the American story, the human story, is one of constant social awakening and growth, and that's what makes us good. Absolutely. The human story is one long march towards libertine justice. Societies only grow stronger the more they encourage sterility and physically destructive sexual behaviors. That never brings about cultural collapse. So don't feel an ounce of dread when you look at those Christian parents filling their 12-passenger van with their Christian children. Surely their great-grandchildren will curse their memory and praise yours. Evans added, there's always going to be people who are afraid and unaware and trying to hold on to what was before. But those people die off like dinosaurs. And this was said by the actor whose name would also die off like the dinosaurs if he were to perish tomorrow. And may his example also inspire us to trust that our righteous names will live on forever in the songs of the children we never bore. Evans concluded, I think the goal is to pay them no mind, march forward and embrace the growth that makes us human. And Afina concludes, amen, new Buzz Lightyear. If we simply embrace the growth that makes us human by rejecting the growth that makes humans, the kingdom ours will remaineth. So they fired Tim Allen for this. And let's have Chris Evans. And is Chris Evans known for his great voice acting? This trend, this is a very distressing trend in Hollywood. You know, if you look at shows, you know, like The Simpsons, that sort of show, voice actors, they're dominated by voice actors. Oh, this, you know, The Simpsons started bringing in celebrity cameos, perhaps overdid it, but I stopped watching that show decades ago, pretty much. And voice actors are really annoyed by this Hollywood trend. And one of the nasty things that Hollywood does is, hey, you know, this new Pixar film, which is going to gross $1 billion, we'd like you to audition for, you know, just top role. Yeah, really? Yeah, okay. But maybe this time. And so the character is described to them. You know, what are the characteristics? What are the qualities of the character? You know, here's some dialogue. Can you work up a riff on this? And then they do. And then later, well, sadly, we pass on you. So they bring in people like Chris Evans and they say, you got the perfect thing for you. And they steal what the voice actor had come up with. You can't see Chris Evans. You can't see him on the screen in an animated movie. But No, you want the top Hollywood stars to do voices for animated movies because maybe there's some truth to it. Oh, well, Chris Evans is in this movie. Oh, is he going to be Captain America? No, he's going to be a toy, talking toy. And you're not going to see Chris Evans because, of course, it's an animated film. But Chris Evans is in it. Well, I'm in then. Although not so much this time. This is a story from Deadline by Anthony D'Alessandro. Dinosaurs toss Lightyear out of orbit at weekend box office as Jurassic World Domination feasts on 68 million plus 4-day to Sunday AM update. Okay. Blame the fact that it doesn't appeal to girls. Blame Disney Plus for stealing family moviegoers. Blame the lack of an ensemble Toy Story cast. Heck, blame everything, as Disney Pixar's Lightyear didn't do its magic by internal studio or industry standards this weekend, with 51 million, close to a third below its lowest 70 million pre-release projection. This is an opening more in the vicinity of Pixar's original fare, i.e. Coco and Ratatouille, so it could still leg out to 200 million plus. However, given how this IP was built on the back of the Toy Story brand, it's clear many were expecting significantly more. Yes, in some, there wasn't any urgency for mass moviegoers to see Lightyear. Is there any urgency for people to watch these innumerable Star Trek and Star Wars spin-offs? Yeah, this story is from 3 days ago, so it doesn't have the moaning, which I'm sure it's obviously begun, that Americans are big fat homophobes, and that's why they didn't go to see Lightyear. And oh yeah, political violence, extremist violence. Well, it's always existed in the United States, and of course it exists now, but we know that it's all right wingers. It's all white supremacists, right? Is it? There is a epidemic, if you will, of violence against pro-life organizations in America. And are you going to read about that in the Washington Post or the New York Times? No, you are not. Because as the governor of New York said recently, pro-lifers are Neanderthals. So I guess they must deserve to be firebombed. This is from Hannah Nightingale at the Post Millennial. In the wake of a firebombing at a Buffalo, New York pregnancy center earlier this month, an Antifa group was found celebrating the attack on Twitter. The group, Antifa Sacramento, wait a minute. Antifa doesn't exist, okay? It doesn't exist. But apparently there's a group called Antifa Sacramento. Took footage posted to Twitter earlier this month by local WGRZ reporter Dave McKinley and dubbed the first 17 seconds of AC/DC's song Thunderstruck over the footage of the burned out building's interior. McKinley had posted the video to Twitter the same day that a Compass Care facility in Buffalo was attacked, with windows being smashed and fires being set inside the building. Antifa Sacramento tweeted above the video, not sure why, but the first 17 seconds of Thunderstruck goes perfectly with the 17-second video of the aftermath of the firebombing of the anti-abortion Compass Care that recently occurred in Buffalo, New York area. Hashtag death to patriarchy, hashtag death to white supremacy. The group also posted an exterior shot of the building, which had been graffitied with the saying, "Jane was here." I believe there's a group called Jane's Revenge or something like that, referring to Jane Doe. Jane Doe of Roe v. Wade, my understanding, or Jane Roe, she changed her mind on the whole subject later on. On June 15th, the group reposted McKinley's video, this time with Thunderstruck playing in the background. Here's a tweet from June 7th from Antifa Sacramento. Jane was here on the side of firebombed Compass Care. Hashtag death to fascism. Solidarity and sound on. Here's the aftermath again of the firebombing of Compass Care, the anti-abortion center in the Buffalo, New York area. The pro-abortion militant group Jane's Revenge has seemingly taken credit for the Buffalo attack, as well as over a dozen others across the country, many of which have included vandalism and Arkansas. You have seen us in Madison, Wisconsin, Fort Collins, Colorado, Reisterstown, Maine, Olympia, Washington, Des Moines, Iowa, Linwood, Washington, Washington, D.C., Asheville, North Carolina, Buffalo, New York, Hollywood, Florida, Vancouver, Washington, Frederick, that should be Massachusetts, Denton, Texas, Gresham, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, among others, as we work in countless locations invisibly, the group wrote in a communication posted earlier this month. The group has stated that your thirsty days expired yesterday and that now we will make it as hard as possible for your campaigns of oppression to continue. The group has called for others to go out and attack other pro-life centers across the U.S. and has called for, alongside other pro-abortion groups, a night of rage the night that the Supreme Court decides of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which could see the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And of course, Antifa has not been declared a terrorist organization by the government of the United States because, of course, Antifa doesn't exist. Yeah, just keep telling yourself that, and maybe you can meme it into existence, or meme Antifa into anti-existence. These people involved with Antifa, they tend to be weird people. This is from the same source. On Tuesday, it was revealed by the Post-Millennial's editor-at-large, Andy Ngo, that a leader of the group Save the Kids previously served time in prison in connection to a child sex crime. Lucas Allen Dietschy was required to register with the Wisconsin Sex Offender Registry in 2006 for the offense of use of a computer to facilitate a child sex crime. His time required on the registry goes through 2030. In 2006, Dietschy had been charged with use of a computer to facilitate child sex crime, as well as attempted child enticement for sexual conduct and an attempted second-degree sexual assault of a child, although the latter two charges were dropped by the prosecution in 2006. Dietschy, who served 2 years on the first charge, is the National Director of Transformative Justice with Save the Kids from Incarceration, a group that looks to end the school-to-prison pipeline. In his biography on the site, it states that he received a master's in criminal justice from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville and is a professor of prisoner education. His LinkedIn account states that he is an adjunct professor at Adams State University. His LinkedIn account also states that he goes by the pronouns he, him, comrade. The biography goes on to state that Dietschy is the national organizer of Letters to Prisoners, Save the Kids, and that he helps send radical propaganda books and birthday cards as organizers of Save the Kids Letters to Prisoners project. According to Ngo, Dietschy is also a leader of the John Brown Brigade of Mankato, an Antifa group in southern Minnesota. Yes, that's certainly a giveaway when you name your organization in honor of one of the craziest people in American history. Yes, a great many of these Antifa and Antifa-affiliated people are sex offenders, particularly, they're pedophiles. Curious, don't you think? But has Antifa infiltrated the Congress of the United States? This is a story by Lisa Carlisle at the Republican Brief. The office of Massachusetts Democrat Representative Jake Auchincloss is suspect in not one, but two instances of shenanigans. Police confirmed that last week the congressman's office was involved in allowing comedian Stephen Colbert's production team into the Capitol complex in an incident that led to security concerns and the arrest of 7 members of Colbert's team. It was confirmed Monday that the Massachusetts congressman's office was involved in checking Colbert's team into Longworth last Thursday for an interview. The crew, which had been jettisoned earlier in the day from another congressional building, was arrested for unlawful entry when found wandering the building late at night. Police said the matter remains under criminal investigation. Auchincloss's office has another previous instance of alleged subversive activity involving the congressman's chief of staff. Just the News reported that the Capitol Police asked federal prosecutors back in March for an arrest warrant for Timothy Hysom, 51, a longtime Democrat congressional staffer who worked for Representative Adam Schiff before rising to be Auchincloss's top aide after capturing Hysom on hidden camera security footage defacing Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's posters with stickers with religious messages, according to a copy of the arrest warrant obtained by Just the News. Police said they believed Hysom may have been involved in defacing 7 posters outside Greene's office in the Longworth House office building between January and March, and that he declined to be interviewed when confronted. Hysom was offered a non-custodial interview, and he declined and retained counsel, the report states. Based on the aforementioned, it is your affianced belief that the defendant, Timothy Dwayne Hysom, did violate a D.C. code defacing public or private property, the arrest warrant stated. No justice, no peace. Isn't that what they say? I suppose in a move that should surprise no one. This is from Mint Press News, Alan McLeod. Twitter has been on a recruitment drive of late, hiring a host of former feds and spies. Studying a number of employment and recruitment websites, Mint Press has ascertained that the social media giant has in recent years recruited dozens of individuals from the national security state to work in the fields of security, trust, safety, and content. Chief among these is the FBI, which is generally known as the Domestic Security and Intelligence Force. However, it has recently expanded its remit into cyberspace. The FBI's investigative authority is the broadest of all federal law enforcement agencies. The About section of its website informs readers. The FBI has divided its investigations into a number of programs, such as domestic and international terrorism, foreign counterintelligence, and cybercrime. Yes, why these people? Well, you're allowed to be anonymous on Twitter. You're not allowed to be anonymous on Facebook. Perhaps the federal government, directly or indirectly, is very interested in finding out the true identities of pseudo-anonymous Twitter users. That would be my guess. And, okay. Oh, Bill Cosby he lost a civil verdict. I just, Bill Cosby is a horrible creep. Everybody knows this. I was a big fan when I was a child, as were pretty much all my friends. I mean, Bill Cosby was huge. The first concert I ever went to was a Bill Cosby concert. It was at the Pacific Coliseum, which is a hockey arena. That's how popular Bill Cosby was. But then when he started, guest hosting The Tonight Show, and he had a big cigar, and his image was very wholesome. But this Bill Cosby that we saw as the host of The Tonight Show was a louche, rather repellent figure. And then we find out all these stories about him in the Playboy Mansion, in the grotto. And I'm thinking, the grotto, eh? They must have put so much chlorine in the water in the grotto in order to kill the venereal detritus therein, that I'm sure it blinded the people who went into it. So a case from 1975, he was found civilly guilty, $500,000 damages. Okay, so let's do some arithmetic here. That was 47 years ago. I'm not going to stick up for Bill Cosby, but it seems fairly obvious to me that it's impossible to have a fair trial after 47 years. Why do these people wait 47 years? Just, to start. And of course, now there's all these other women coming out of the woodwork with their own suits. I'm a firm believer of the statutes of limitation. This is from Daniel Bates, the Daily Mail. How corrupt is the American government or American politicians? Exclusive, Ghislaine Maxwell touted her connection to Bill Clinton and how she helped launch his global initiative to prove her desire to do good in the world as she seeks a lower sentence for trafficking underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein. Is this a shot across the bow at Bill Clinton, do you think? that, yeah, I hope, the court plays along, because I know a lot of bad things about Bill Clinton, and you wouldn't want me to speak about them. Of course, people have been laying bets on how long Ghislaine Maxwell is going to live for months now. And you know, when I was back on Luke Ford's show, I got into this big argument with Kyle over the death of Jeff Epstein. Oh, these things happen all the time. This is the most famous prisoner in America, and apparently they can't arrange enough security to stop him from hanging himself, if indeed that's what happened. Oh, well, the guards weren't looking at their monitors. Oh, well, maybe you could have brought in some guards known to be good at their job and conscientious, who would make sure to check the monitors. I mean, how hard is that to check a monitor? That strikes me as one of the easiest jobs in the world. This is from Off the Press. Barack and Michelle making even more millions. Barack and Michelle Obama joining Amazon's Audible to make more money following the 2019 deal with Spotify. And there is embedded a video here. It's a Spotify original, and it's called Renegades, Born in the USA. And apparently the renegade or renegades are Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen. By what metric is Bruce Springsteen a renegade? How many hundreds of millions of dollars is Bruce Springsteen worth? I note that, concert recordings of his, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, or whatever, there were released probably, one every month or whatever. And these fanatical Bruce fans are going to buy every single one of them. But nope, he is a renegade, as of course is Barack Obama. The longer story is at Variety by Todd Spangler. And what do Barack and Michelle bring to this platform? Okay, yes, they're famous. Are they known to be excellent storytellers? Audible set an exclusive multi-year and global first-look production deal with Higher Ground, the Obama's media company, covering multiple audio projects. The slate of Higher Ground shows for Audible will reflect the company's shared mission to tell meaningful and entertaining stories that elevate diverse voices and experiences. The company did not provide details on what forthcoming audio projects may be in the works. The deal comes after the Obama's exclusive podcast pact with Spotify, originally inked in 2019, came to an end. Spotify says it declined to renew the deal. According to sources, the Obamas wanted their podcast programming to be distributed as widely as possible and not exclusive to Spotify. Higher Ground also disagreed with Spotify over the number of its shows that would feature the former president and first lady. Well, we know that Barack Obama is as lazy as sin, but no, this is a good one. We only hired you because you were the president of the United States and Michelle was the first lady, so we're going to want to see or hear a lot of you. Yeah, I don't know. My schedule's pretty busy. Really? Doing what? What is it that you do now? And Amber Heard. This is she needs someone to give her some good advice. Like, shut up. Like, start shutting up now. And shut up for a long time. People forget, especially these days. The internet cycle. It's, it runs, people run out of interest pretty quickly, right? Also, people, are forgiving. Maybe in a year or two or three or whatever that, people are willing to embrace Amber Heard again. But nope. This is from Heather Hamilton at the Washington Examiner. With nothing to lose, Amber Heard is in the process of writing a tell-all book following her defamation trial against ex-husband Johnny Depp. So, You lost a defamation trial by indirectly accusing Johnny Depp of, physical abuse, all sorts of horrible physical abuse. Now you're going to go into great detail in a book about this. I know that, prior restraint is banned in American law, but it seems to me it wouldn't be very difficult for Johnny Depp's lawyers to call up the publisher and say, you realize that if this book goes to press, we're going to sue you for $50 or $100 million or whatever, because you saw the verdict of the case, right? Yeah. Heard is reportedly looking to boost her income after a Fairfax, Virginia jury found the Aquaman actress had defamed Depp in order to pay the actor damages amounting to $15 million. A source close to Heard told OK Magazine that Heard is broke and desires revenge in telling her story after predominantly negative coverage throughout the trial. You may have noticed that Amber Heard was pictured in a discount clothing store last week. Too funny. Amber considers her career in Hollywood over. She's already in talks and is excited about it. At this point, she has nothing to lose and wants to tell all. You know that Mel Gibson managed to make it back into Hollywood. Mel Gibson. So I think that if Mel could do it, then Amber Heard could do it. But again, she has to take my advice and start shutting up. Let's take a final look at the chat. We'll scroll down to the bottom. Amber, no, she wasn't at the Goodwill. Was it Winners or, one of those discount chains? David the Gnome says Mel Gibson is a national treasure. Tarot Destroyer says home is where the dog hair sticks to everything but the dog. Anron says, I think the book will also cover her relationships with Musk and Franco. Franco, James Franco. He's been eclipsed, right? Acting school. Hey, I've set up an acting school. How would you like to join the James Franco School of Acting? Sure. What do I need to do? Sleep with me and pay me. You need to pay me for having sex with you. That is quite the scam, wouldn't you say? TJ Maxx, says Anron. Thank you for that. He adds, Mel has actual talent, has made millions of dollars for Hollywood. The Right Honorable says maybe Barry O will give us a show where he gives us his NCAA basketball picks, to show us how cool he is and how he totally relates to the average dude. Do they still call Springsteen the boss? Maybe. I suppose if Rolling Stone's still around, but, they did this thing with Springsteen that they did with all these other Prince, another example. His best album since Around the World in a Day, right? Or David Bowie, his best album since Scary Monsters, or Bruce Springsteen, his best album since The River. Yeah, the 3 or 4 or 5 albums before this were duds. But suddenly, in middle age, Bruce Springsteen, he's just captured all that youthful vitality. Okay. Oscar Toe says Springsteen became a renegade when he did a podcast with Obama. Okay. Terra Destroyer quotes John Henry Tilden, MD. There's no question that perfect sanitation has almost obliterated smallpox. Of course, when the time comes, the credit will be given to vaccination. Why are all these people going to kiss Zelensky's ring? It's beginning to seem like some dark ritual to me. Yes, Merrick Garland. What on earth is the Attorney General of the United States going to Ukraine? There's no law enforcement problems in America. Boy, they have made a bad bet on Zelensky. They have made a bad bet. The Ukraine fatigue is set in a very big way. Oscar Toe says, but my modest high school teacher said John Brown was an American hero, Kevin. Okay. And what's funny, though, is 20 miles outside of Sacramento was deep red, says the Right Honorable. The new New York City mayor is quickly becoming worse than the last one, says Oscar Toe. What was he bitching about? He was bitching about
some black neighborhood there were 200 people living in some neighborhood. And he didn't mention Robert Moses, because I'm sure this dumbbell has never heard of Robert Moses. This so-called urban renewal, well, it wrecked this black community of 200 people. All manner of neighborhoods in New York City were wrecked by Robert Moses. So that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.